Hello. The next series of videos you will watch, I will be posting on Thursdays. I'm going to be calling it Throwback Thursday. And these are videos that I had originally posted for instructional purposes on my old YouTube channel. They did decently well, especially for somebody who wasn't maintaining a YouTube channel at the time. I hope you enjoy. If you're watching this video, you have chosen to work with a triangle on construction paper and using the rotation tile. So now, the first thing we're going to want to remember, the first thing that I'm expecting you to do is to construct an equilateral triangle. Luckily, we all did so well with this on the test that it should be like riding a bike. So I'm going to go ahead and start with my segment. Now you're going to want to start with a segment that's a good portion of the paper. Okay, if I go ahead and pull this back, you can see that it takes up a good length, but not nearly all the length. You want something that's not going to be too small so that you're cutting very fine, short lines. You want it to be of a significant size, but you also don't want it to be too big, because remember, you got 15 to cover. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and set my compass to the length. Scoot that down, and then mark my intersection. Okay. Thing to remember is that it needs to be a construction, so we're putting those construction skills to test. We didn't learn them for nothing, and two, so that we know it's a perfect equilateral triangle. Okay, so I've got my equilateral triangle set up. Now be very, very careful with the cutting. You want it to remain an equilateral triangle. So I'm going to go ahead and cut on this. I'm just going to be very slow and deliberate with my cuts. And I always like to cut over to give myself enough room to pivot and then go the other direction. Because in the end, this paper is useless. Now, one thing I should have mentioned at the beginning of the video, but I will have said this in class, make sure you cut it using construction paper. You don't want that thickness when it comes time to actually tracing your tessellation. It works so much better than computer paper. Alright, there we go. Equilateral triangle. Boom. Now, from the videos I've watched, when you start your design, I'm going to just cut this little sliver right here. The videos I watched in researching this part is that some of them tell you when you're on your design you don't want to use up the full length of the triangle, and then some of them tell you that you can use the full length of the triangle. I'm going to tell you it's up to you. The important thing to remember is that if you don't use all of the length, so say you start here with your design, you're going to want this length to be repeated over here when you rotate it, or over here, depending on which way you rotate it. But I am going to start at the corner, and I'm a person who doesn't see the initial artistry when I'm making my design. I just go ahead and make something and see what it could be afterwards. Okay. Now I went corner to corner. Now this is the most important part when you're cutting out this. I'm going to cut it out, and I'm going to either rotate it this way or rotate it this way, full 60 degrees. You're going to want to be very, very careful with your cuts. Now, the important thing to remember is don't panic if you happen to cut it out and you go slightly off pattern. Just ignore it and keep cutting, because you're not going to be able to go back and recut it so that it turns out even smoother. If you end up trimming it, then the tessellation is not going to be quite right. Okay, so I'm going to start cutting. Very slow and deliberate cuts. Not worrying about being quite perfect, just making sure that if I do make a mistake, I don't go back. The mistake has been made, we move on, and we accept it. I'm sure artists everywhere feel that their work is imperfect. I've heard the phrase, art is never finished, it's only abandoned. I'm sure artists feel that way because they feel they could always have done a better job. I say you make something you're proud of and you move on. That's another thing that the videos will tell you. Be perfect on your cutting. That's not what I want you to know. I want you to know that if you make a mistake, you move on from it. So we can kind of see now the design as it's taking place. Now, as I said before, I can rotate it about this point, or I can rotate it this point. The thing to remember, since I went corner to corner, I'm going to rotate it this way. Since I went about this corner, I'm going to want to make sure the edges match up. The reason why I'm going to want to make sure of that is because if there is a gap or an overlap, then the tessellation won't quite work right. Okay, I need to get some tape. Hold on a second. Okay, here we go. Let's see if I can do this. I always manage to leave a slight gap and it always bugs me. Ooh, I think I did it. I see I have a little bit of tape right here that I'm just going to cut off. I prefer to cut it off than fold it over because I don't want it to get in the way of the tessellation. Make sure I get all the way as close to the edge as possible so that now you got your tile. Now if you wanted to, you could do something with this edge. This was on GeoGebra when I said we would set the midpoint and rotate a design 180 degrees. So if you were to do that, lo and behold, you get to use your measurements from your ruler. So if I were to measure the length of this side, it looks like it, ooh, wow, look at that. It's 12 centimeters on the button. So I'd mark my midpoint at 6. I'll just mark it with a little tick mark. That's my midpoint. And I can do some kind of design. Now I'll leave a little bit of edge to show you what I was talking about earlier, that if you leave an edge, you have to make sure that you leave an edge over here. So I'll go ahead and trace and now what I was saying before, that you can just make very deliberate marks with your pen. You can also use your straight edge if you choose. You want to make perfectly straight lines. I'm choosing not to. I think beautiful art lies with some imperfections. Now, if you're using the midpoint, go ahead probably left a little too thin mark there. Okay, so I had that little bit there. I'm going to want to rotate this piece 180 degrees onto this side. So I'm going to want to make sure that these little pieces right here line up so that they're roughly even. The idea is to get as exact as possible. We could use our measurements for that, but go ahead and do that. Looks like it's 9/10 of a centimeter. So 9/10, right about, dang it, it's moving on me. 9/10 right there. Now, as I was saying before, if you're using the midpoint and this side, you want to get your measurements as exact as possible. That's why I'm using the centimeter side, because the measurements are closer together. Ooh, this one's take a very steady sleight of hand. You know, let me try it this way. Put the tape on there first. This is a risky method, but can also be rewarding. Oh, it worked. So there's my tile. I'm going to leave that as my tile. You can kind of see I also left some room here, here. Hopefully that all lines up perfectly. So now we get down to the tracing. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and put this tile, and I like to just start in the center. I'm going to go ahead and trace around it. Oop. It's okay. First time is just a sketch, and you can start to see why I chose construction paper for this. Very rigid edges. You're going to want to make sure you're holding it down everywhere. So I'm going to rotate it now, put it back in place. Still tracing, and then I'm going to come back over to this side and make those two ends meet. There we go. I'm not seeing any design in that, but that's okay. I'm sure you guys will think of something. Now, I'm going to go ahead and rotate it. So it was this way. I go ahead and rotate it this way so that you can see the cutouts line up. Oh. Okay. Don't worry, you're not going to have to sit through me tracing this entire thing. I'm just going to show you a couple. I get that, and then I would go back, and I can see that if I rotate it 180 degrees, I can get another tile off this way. Now, you can see here, as I start to trace, that I'm not going to get the whole tile on this part of the paper. That's okay. I mean, you got to think that in geometry, a plane extends forever. We don't have anything like that. We just got to deal with what we have, and it's going to run off the page a bit. Nope. So there you can see my tessellation starting to take shape. I'll go ahead and finish this and show it to you in class, but for now, you got enough to get started on. When you get down to the final stages, you're going to want to make sure you take a permanent marker and carefully trace over all your edges. That'll thicken it. Actually, I take that back. You can do that. You don't have to. If you want to leave it in pencil, and then you can blend the color in much better if you don't do that. So yeah, I take that back. Thank you for watching. Good luck.